Late at night, when the roads are quiet and the only sound is the hum of your engine, highways take on a life of their own. In those moments, the open road feels less like freedom and more like a trap, surrounded by shadows that seem to move when you're not looking. Across the United States, certain highways are known not just for their twists and turns, but for the stories they carry. Haunting, terrifying stories of those who never left. Tonight, we'll take you on a journey through the 5 most chilling haunted highways in the US, where reality blurs into nightmare and every mile brings you closer to something you were never meant to see. Buckle up, because this ride will test your nerves and your imagination. Are you ready to face what lurks on the open road? Story 1. The story of the ghost bride. The rain was coming down in sheets the night Kevin Thompson took his first solo road trip. At just 22, he had a restless spirit and a thirst for adventure. He wanted to conquer the infamous Route 66, a stretch of highway filled with nostalgia, stories, and more than a few dark legends. But Kevin wasn't thinking about any of that as his headlights cut through the storm. He was just hoping to make it to the next town. That's when he saw her, a figure in white, standing by the roadside, drenched but poised. Her gown glowed faintly in the storm's dim light. Kevin slowed down, unsure if he should stop. What would you have done in his place? Kevin pulled over, his tires kicking up a spray of muddy water. The woman turned, her face pale and hauntingly beautiful. She wore a vintage wedding dress, its lace tattered and yellowed. Her eyes seemed distant, as though she wasn't really seeing him. "Need a ride?" Kevin asked hesitantly, rolling down his window. She nodded slowly, but didn't speak. Kevin opened the passenger door, and she slid inside, bringing a chill with her that made him shiver. He adjusted the heat instinctively. "Where are you headed?" he asked. She turned her head slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just down the road, to my husband." Kevin nodded, trying to shake the unease creeping into his gut. He focused on the road, the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers offering some comfort. "Getting married in weather like this, huh?" he joked, trying to lighten the mood. The woman didn't laugh. Instead, she turned her face toward him. "I already did." Kevin glanced at her, his pulse quickening. Her eyes seemed darker now, her face more gaunt. He swallowed hard and kept driving, but something in his gut told him he'd made a mistake. After about 10 minutes, she spoke again. "Stop here," she said, pointing to a rusted old gas station that looked like it hadn't been open in decades. Kevin hesitated. "Are you sure? This place looks—" "Stop!" she repeated, her voice sharper now. Against his better judgment, he pulled over. She opened the door and stepped out without another word. Kevin watched as she walked toward the station, her dress trailing in the mud. She disappeared around the corner. Curiosity got the better of him, and Kevin decided to follow. He grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out into the rain, the beam of light barely piercing the darkness. "Hey," he called. "Miss, are you okay?" No response. Kevin rounded the corner of the station, and his breath caught in his throat. The woman stood there, but she wasn't alone. She was holding hands with a shadowy figure in a tattered suit. His face was indistinct, almost blurred, but his presence was suffocating. Suddenly, the woman turned to Kevin, her eyes now hollow black pits. "You shouldn't have stopped," she whispered. Kevin staggered back, tripping over a piece of debris. When he looked up, they were gone. Shaking, he scrambled back to his car and drove away as fast as he could. The rain seemed to lighten, but his heart was pounding in his chest. When he reached the next town, Kevin stopped at a diner to collect himself. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, brought him a coffee and asked what had him so shaken. He told her about the woman in the wedding dress. Her face went pale. "You saw her," she said, almost in a whisper. "The ghost bride of Route 66. Kevin frowned. "The what?" The waitress explained that the legend had been around for decades. A young bride and her husband had been driving to their honeymoon when they crashed on Route 66 during a storm. Both died on impact. Ever since, Travelers had reported seeing her, always searching for her husband, luring unsuspecting drivers into the dark. Kevin didn't sleep that night. Do you believe in the ghost bride of Route 66? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you're enjoying this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and share for more chilling tales like this. Story 2. The story of the phantom truck. It was past midnight when Rachel's car broke down on Clinton Road, a desolate stretch of asphalt winding through the woods of New Jersey. The moonlight barely filtered through the trees, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move with her. She glanced at her phone, no signal. As she stepped out of her car to check the engine, she heard it. The low rumble of a truck engine, distant but growing louder. A sense of relief washed over her. Maybe someone was coming to help, but when she turned to look, she saw nothing. No headlights, no truck, just the endless dark road behind her. Then the engine roared again, closer this time. Clinton Road has always been known for its strange occurrences. Locals whisper about ghostly figures, strange creatures, and inexplicable disappearances. But perhaps the most terrifying legend is that of the phantom truck, a vehicle that appears out of nowhere, terrorizing anyone unlucky enough to cross its path. Rachel was about to become its next victim. She popped the hood of her car, fumbling with her flashlight as the wind picked up, howling through the trees. The sound of the truck engine grew louder, this time accompanied by the faint glimmer of headlights in the distance. "Finally," she muttered. She waved her flashlight, signaling for help. The truck's headlights brightened, its engine revving. Relief turned to unease as the vehicle didn't slow down. Instead, it sped up, barreling toward her. Panic set in. Rachel dove into the ditch beside the road just as the truck roared past, its horn blaring. She peeked out, expecting to see taillights fading into the distance, but there was nothing. The truck had vanished. Breathing heavily, Rachel climbed back to the road. Her car, strangely, started on the first try, and she wasted no time getting out of there. But as she drove, the engine sound returned, this time directly behind her. She glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. The truck was back, its headlights glaring, its grille impossibly close to her bumper. She floored the gas, the speedometer climbing past 70, then 80. The truck kept pace. Her heart pounded as the road twisted and turned, her tires screeching against the pavement. She could hear the engine's deafening roar, feel the heat of the headlights burning into her car. Then, just as she rounded a sharp curve, the truck swerved off the road and disappeared into the woods, as if it had never been there at all. Rachel didn't stop until she reached a gas station miles away. Trembling, she told the clerk what had happened. The older man behind the counter gave her a long, hard look. "You're lucky," he said finally. "Not everyone escapes the phantom truck." Clinton Road is infamous for stories like Rachel's. Some say the truck is driven by the ghost of a deranged trucker who died on the road decades ago. Others believe it's an omen, a harbinger of doom for those who see it. What would you have done in Rachel's place? Would you have tried to outrun the truck or stayed to face it? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story has your pulse racing, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling tales. Rachel wasn't the only one to experience the phantom truck. Story 3. The Lady in White of Highway 101. Jason Rivera had always loved the open road. For him, late-night drives were a kind of therapy, a way to clear his head after a long day. But something about Highway 101 that night felt off. It wasn't just the fog rolling in from the Pacific or the eerie silence that hung over the stretch of road. It was the sensation of being watched. It was 2:34 a.m., according to his dashboard clock, when he first saw her, a woman standing by the roadside, her long white dress flowing in the cold night air. She didn't wave, didn't move. She just stood there, staring into the distance, as if she were waiting for someone. Against his better judgment, Jason slowed down. Highway 101 is one of the most iconic roads in the United States, running along the breathtaking California coastline. But beneath its scenic beauty lies a darker history, one filled with tragedies and unexplained phenomena. And the Lady in White is its most enduring mystery. Jason wasn't a superstitious man, but something about the woman's stillness unnerved him. He pulled over, rolling down the passenger side window. "Hey, do you need help?" he called out. She didn't answer. Jason hesitated. "Are you okay?" He tried again, louder this time. Finally, she turned to face him. Her face was pale, almost luminescent in the moonlight. Her eyes seemed distant, filled with an overwhelming sadness. She pointed down the road without saying a word. Jason frowned. "Do you need a ride?" She nodded slowly. Reluctantly, he unlocked the door. She slid into the passenger seat, her presence filling the car with an inexplicable chill. Jason couldn't help but glance at her dress, now that she was closer. It was old-fashioned, like something out of the 1940s. It was damp, as though she'd been standing in the rain, though the night had been dry. They drove in silence for several miles. Jason's hands gripped the wheel tightly, his mind racing with questions he didn't dare ask. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Don't stop at the bridge." Jason's stomach knotted. "What? Why?" She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. The fog thickened as they approached a narrow, weathered bridge. Jason slowed down instinctively. The woman turned to him suddenly, her face now alarmingly close to his. Her eyes, once sorrowful, were now wide with fear. "I said don't stop!" she screamed. Startled, Jason hit the gas, the car lurching forward across the bridge. Out of the corner of his eye, he thought he saw something, a shadowy figure standing in the middle of the bridge. But when he looked directly, it was gone. As soon as they were across, the woman slumped back in her seat, her face once again serene. Jason's heart was pounding, his thoughts a blur. "What's going on?" he demanded. She didn't answer. In fact, she didn't move at all. Jason glanced over, his breath catching in his throat. The seat was empty. The lady in white of Highway 101 has been a recurring figure in local legends. Some say she's the spirit of a young bride who died tragically on the bridge in the 1940s, her car careening off the edge during a storm. Others claim she's a guardian spirit, warning travelers of danger ahead. Jason's story doesn't end there, though. He later learned that just hours after his encounter, another car had stopped on that very bridge. The driver reported seeing a shadowy figure before losing control and plunging into the ravine below. What do you think? Was she a ghost seeking help, or was she trying to protect Jason from a similar fate? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales that'll keep you up at night. Story 4, The Headless Motorcyclist of Route 666. It started as a dare, a late-night drive down Route 666, the infamous Devil's Highway. For Jake and his best friend Kyle, it was just supposed to be a thrill. They were skeptics, the kind of guys who laughed at ghost stories and swapped urban legends like baseball cards. But that night, as their car sped down the desolate stretch of desert road, laughter turned to silence. It began with a sound, a low, guttural rumble that grew louder with each passing second. At first they thought it was the wind, but when Jake glanced in the rearview mirror, his blood ran cold. A motorcycle was speeding toward them, its rider shrouded in darkness. As the bike drew closer, its single headlight glaring, Jake realized something was wrong. The rider had no head. Route 666 has long been a hotbed of strange sightings and eerie encounters, but none are as terrifying or as persistent as the headless motorcyclist. The legend tells of a reckless biker who lost his life in a gruesome accident on the highway decades ago. Some say he was decapitated by a low-hanging road sign. Others claim it was a cable stretched across the road by a group of vandals. Whatever the truth, his restless spirit is said to haunt the road, chasing down anyone who dares to travel it at night. Jake's story began like many others. He and Kyle had been joking around, trying to outdo each other with scary stories, when Kyle had suggested the drive. "You're not scared of a little ghost road, are you?" Kyle had teased, grinning. Jake had rolled his eyes. "Scared? But if we get stranded out there, I'm blaming you." The first hour of the drive was uneventful, almost boring. The desert stretched out in every direction, the darkness broken only by their headlights. But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, things began to change. Jake noticed it first. The temperature inside the car seemed to drop, despite the fact that the air conditioning was off. Then came the sound. The distant rumble of an engine growing louder with every passing moment. "You hear that?" Jake asked, glancing over at Kyle. Kyle frowned. "It's probably just a car behind us." But when Jake checked the mirror, there was nothing there. Then, without warning, the motorcycle appeared. It was right behind them, its single headlight glaring like an unblinking eye. Jake felt his pulse quicken. "Where did that guy come from?" Kyle muttered. The motorcycle drew closer, its engine roaring. Jake tightened his grip on the wheel. "I don't like this." As the bike pulled alongside them, Jake caught a glimpse of the rider. His leather jacket was torn, his hands gripping the handlebars tightly. But where his head should have been, there was nothing but air. Kyle screamed, "Floor it, man! Go!" Jake slammed his foot on the gas, the car lurching forward. But no matter how fast they went, the motorcycle kept pace. Its headlight flickered like a dying bulb, casting strange, distorted shadows across the road. The rider raised one hand, pointing ahead. For a moment, Jake thought he was signaling something, but then the bike swerved directly into their lane. "Jake, watch out!" Kyle yelled. Jake yanked the wheel hard, narrowly avoiding a collision. The car skidded, tires screeching, before coming to a stop at the side of the road. When they looked back, the motorcycle was gone. Jake and Kyle aren't the only ones to have encountered the headless motorcyclist. Dozens of drivers have reported similar stories, being chased, taunted, or even run off the road by the spectral rider. What would you have done in Jake's situation? Would you have kept driving or pulled over to confront the unknown? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because the next story might just be about a highway near you. Story 5. The Vanishing Hitchhiker of Bluegrass Parkway. Mark Jenkins had driven Bluegrass Parkway dozens of times, but that night, the road felt different. The Kentucky stretch was known for its peaceful rolling hills and thick woods on either side, but under the pale glow of the moon, it seemed almost too quiet. Mark was heading home from a late shift, his radio barely audible over the hum of his car. That's when he saw her. A young woman standing on the side of the road, her blonde hair shimmering in the moonlight. She was barefoot, wearing a thin dress that fluttered in the cool night breeze. She raised her hand, signaling for a ride. Mark hesitated. Something about her seemed off. But as he slowed down, her eyes met his. They were filled with a mix of desperation and sadness. Against his better judgment, he pulled over. The hitchhiker approached the car slowly, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were freezing. Mark rolled down the window just enough to speak to her. "Need a lift?" he asked cautiously. "Yes, please," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just need to get to the next town." Mark unlocked the door, and she slipped into the passenger seat. The air in the car seemed to grow colder immediately, and a faint, sweet smell, like wildflowers, filled the space. "What were you doing out there in the middle of the night?" Mark asked, trying to keep his tone light. "I got stranded," she said, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. "It's a long story." Mark nodded, respecting her silence. He noticed her hands trembling, and her bare feet were dirty, scratched from walking. He reached into the back seat, grabbing an old hoodie. "Here," he said, offering it to her. She smiled faintly, taking the hoodie and draping it over her shoulders. "Thank you," she murmured. They drove for a few minutes in silence before she spoke again. "Can you drop me off near the old covered bridge? It's not far." Mark frowned. The bridge she mentioned was abandoned, closed for years after a series of accidents. He'd heard rumors about the place, stories of ghostly sightings and strange occurrences. "You sure that's where you want to go?" he asked, his unease growing. She nodded, her expression unreadable. When they reached the bridge, Mark pulled over. He turned to say something, but the passenger seat was empty. The hoodie he'd given her was neatly folded, sitting on the seat as if she'd never been there. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. He stepped out of the car, shining his flashlight toward the bridge. There was no sign of the hitchhiker, but as he turned to get back into his car, he saw something in the rearview mirror. A faint figure standing on the road, watching him. Mark's experience wasn't unique. Over the years, countless drivers on Bluegrass Parkway have reported picking up a mysterious hitchhiker who vanishes without a trace. Some believe she's the ghost of a young woman who died in a car crash near the covered bridge decades ago. Others think she's a warning, a spirit tied to the highway's dark past. What would you have done in Mark's shoes? Let me know in the comments. And if this story has you on edge, hit that like button and subscribe for more chilling tales from the road. Not long after Mark's experience, a truck driver named Tom encountered the vanishing hitchhiker under eerily similar circumstances. Tom was a seasoned driver, someone who prided himself on his no-nonsense attitude. He didn't believe in ghosts, let alone stories about haunted highways. But that night, as he made his way down Bluegrass Parkway, something changed. It was just past 3 a.m. when he saw her, a young woman standing in the middle of the road. She was wearing the same thin dress described by others, her bare feet planted firmly on the asphalt. Tom slammed on his brakes, his truck skidding to a stop just feet away from her. He jumped out, furious. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" he yelled. The woman didn't respond. She just stared at him, her expression calm, almost serene. Tom's anger faded, replaced by confusion. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I need a ride," she said simply. Against his better judgment, Tom helped her into the cab of his truck. As they drove, she spoke in vague, fragmented sentences about her life, how she'd been traveling to visit her fiancé, how she'd gotten lost along the way. But when Tom asked for details, her answers didn't make sense. Her story seemed to shift, the details inconsistent. "Where exactly are you heading?" he asked, trying to piece it together. "The covered bridge," she replied. Tom felt a jolt of unease. "You mean the one that's abandoned?" She nodded. When they reached the bridge, Tom pulled over, but before he could say a word, she was gone. The seat beside him was empty, her presence erased, as if she'd never been there. Tom sat in stunned silence, his hands gripping the wheel. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement. In his side mirror, the woman stood at the edge of the bridge, her figure fading into the mist. Tom's encounter added another layer to the mystery of the vanishing hitchhiker. Was she a restless spirit, doomed to wander Bluegrass Parkway forever? Or was she something else entirely? A warning, perhaps, or a manifestation of the road's tragic history? Bluegrass Parkway may look serene by day, but its nights tell a different story. From the vanishing hitchhiker to the ghostly figures near the old covered bridge, it's a place where the past refuses to stay buried. The next time you find yourself driving through Kentucky late at night, keep an eye on the roadside. And if you see a hitchhiker, think twice before stopping. What do you think? Was the vanishing hitchhiker a ghost or something more sinister? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves a good scare. Stay safe out there and always keep an eye on the road.